Welcome back to Fable Talk. Today, your favorite playtester has returned, Tylen, and he and I are discussing what we think makes a good TCG, while tying that all in with some Fable's End stuff, and we talk about some other stuff about trading card games and whatever. Let's go! So I will start the podcast with the question of what makes a great TCG, in your opinion?
Oh boy. First thing is probably understandability. There's a bunch of different branches to that particular quality, but usually I narrow them down to is the gameplay mechanics relatively easy to understand? Like, if you taught someone, could they eventually oh, okay, yeah, this makes sense, and I could probably play a game of it. And slightly more importantly, because it is a TCG, uh, do the actual cards themselves make sense? Is the information understandable? Do their effects make sense? So on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a lot more than just that, but yeah, you continue.
Are there games that can you point to some examples of TCGs that you think that do this well, that have this understandability and clear uh, presentation, or they're in their card text, they're easily grokkable. For listeners that don't know the word grokkable, that's a term we've been using a lot in chat, because it just basically means how instantly understandable is an idea. I don't know I can't remember where it came from. Eric was the one who introduced me to that term.
It works though.
Yeah, it does. It has a specific origin. I think it's computer programming or something. But it just basically means if something is grokkable, it's instantly understandable in an intuitive way. And I generally agree with you. I think that a great TCG is understandable, and the cards are written clearly, so that when you read them, you're not oh my God, what does this even mean? But I'm sorry, go ahead.
This will raise a few red flags, full admittance. This was Yu-Gi-Oh before XYZ Monsters came in.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah. So one of the things, because I'm an old school Yu-Gi-Oh player, I used to play a lot when I was a kid, and I used to also be on YGO Pro all the time back when I was younger, when I decided I was too cool for school in doing homework. So I just chilled on there for a while. Before Yu-Gi-Oh sort of started branching into the extra deck, there's still some things that are completely fine with it, but it was very understandable of what you could actively do in the game, as well as how the cards themselves functioned. It wasn't perfect. Yu-Gi-Oh's never perfect. But nowadays, it's also a case of if you have stuff going to the extra deck, you have a multitude of different options. Now the deck itself is also its own extra deck because of how easily you get access to it. Your graveyard is your second hand. The only place that hasn't really been fully touched is the banishment exiled zone, and even then, sometimes there's some cards that go and grab stuff out of that. But yeah, back in the day, it was sort of what I used to thrive on, because it was just fun back then. You could pretty much just run whatever. All the cards were mostly understandable. You could make these really silly combos. Yeah.
I think Yu-Gi-Oh is a really interesting example of one, Yu-Gi-Oh is pretty old, as one of the big.
Very old.
So it's seen a
It's
lot of evolution in its gameplay. It's actually what I think, to me, it's as a case study, it's a super interesting example of how the the meta informs the card design, which informs the meta, which informs the card design. Because if you look at early Yu-Gi-Oh, and my knowledge of Yu-Gi-Oh is pretty peripheral. My Kwame is a big Yu-Gi-Oh guy, so he knows so much about Yu-Gi-Oh. He's like an encyclopedia of Yu-Gi-Oh. We're talking design stuff, and he'll just be like, okay,
well, oh hey, I remember this.
Yeah, he'll be like, well, this reminds me of this card, and then it'll be a 20-minute expository explanation of how this one card works, and it's it's always this labyrinth of card effects, and then by the time we arrive, the game is
Yeah.
like, this is why we can't do that. And I'm always like, okay, I got it.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
the way that it used to work was Yu-Gi-Oh, the game system itself is like you're putting monsters down, you're attacking your opponent, you're trying to get their life points down to zero. And there was a bit of a back and forth where it was like I play a monster,
Yes.
I attack you with the monster, or I play it in defense mode or whatever, then I pass the turn and you do the same. And then a few turns later, you would reach your win condition of bringing in your big monster or whatever. And now the meta has like it's just a completely different game than what it used to be because
You're trying to kill someone on the first turn or create a board to where you can stop them from playing.
yes,
Yes.
exactly. And it seems to like the main the like the design thread that is working through all of the card designs is that how do you make this card connect to another card so that it can connect to another card so it can connect to another card
Yep.
so you can
Lots
play.
of chains.
Yeah, you can chain a bunch of stuff on your first turn rather than I'm drawing my hand of five and I'm playing my normal summon for
Playing
the
one
turn.
monster and just leaving at that.
Yeah, and passing the
Yeah.
turn to you, and then we kind of like work out the game unfolds through like various attacks, and we're kind of like mitigating our game experience through the combat. Now it's like, can I go first? And when I go first, do I get the like right combination of cards such that I can just like continuously activate things until I get to that state where I'm either one TKing you or just making it impossible for you to play. And then your
Mhm.
opponent is like, do I have the cards in hand? Do I have the hand traps that enable me to stop this from going off? And if I don't, then I lose. Like that's kind of the game right
Yep.
now. Um, and it's interesting because I think from like what I have seen from early Yu-Gi-Oh, it was just a simpler game back then.
It was so much more simpler.
So, and because it was simpler, the templating and the card effects were much easier to understand because it was like it also had a cartoon show that was like teaching you how to play, sort of. Um,
Good.
yeah,
Are you referring to like the actual anime
yeah,
itself
the
or a
anime
cartoon?
itself, right, right.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, the reason I asked that's because at least the early seasons of Yu-Gi-Oh, I've watched it pretty. It is like notorious for having various like rule-breaking
right,
interactions.
sure.
Yeah,
At the very
it's
least,
gotten to the point of
at
yeah.
the very least, it was
It,
like I'm normal summoning something. You would get it would be like a primer for kids to understand the vernacular of the game, even if it was like
yes,
inaccurate in its rules execution,
yeah.
right? Like Blue Eyes White Dragon, even I'm familiar with that, and I never, I played Yu-Gi-Oh a handful of times in the early years, but I wasn't like really into it. And even I can tell you like who the iconic monsters are from that game, just based on the like culture of the anime and the way that the show is marketed. It's like a really interesting case study in how um, people can become familiar with something through all these like peripheral media, and then from that familiarity, they can enter the game and not feel totally overwhelmed.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So you feel though that like Yu-Gi-Oh back in the day was fairly clear though.
Yes. It was I don't know if you actually remember this at all. Do you still have the like reviews from the first time that you were in at playthrough by
I
chance?
do. Yeah.
Like we had like little video
Yeah,
reviews.
I do.
If you look at mine, I think I mentioned that Fable's End reminds me of like the old school version of Yu-Gi-Oh, where it feels like a active back and forth, and it's just it's so much better than what Yu-Gi-Oh is currently.
Do you think so this is the thing that's come up a lot, and I think that this is kind of like the direction of the conversation. We, because Kwame is a Yu-Gi-Oh player, and there's something kind of like I, being a non-Yu-Gi-Oh player, I can't quite put it into words, but his uh, love for Fable's End is stemming from kind of a similar experience that he gets playing Yu-Gi-Oh. Um, and I'm curious to know if you have like a similar feeling about that, like if there's like a connecting tissue between the two games that
I would probably say yes, if I'm being honest. A lot of the people that I've played like Fable's End in person with, at least, like I don't know if you remember them, but Damien as well as Ari, both of them are also Yu-Gi-Oh players. We actually met in like high school based off of us just like playing Yu-Gi-Oh in one of the like corners of the school during lunch. Uh, and I would be fairly certain you could probably find a lot more people just in general, like within the Discord, for the people that you met like at various conventions. They've played Yu-Gi-Oh! And they've also gotten to the point of where like this game is boring for either the point of I have to do a 15-minute combo on turn one to stop my opponents from playing, or I just have to get through that combo. Fable's End reminds them of better days.
Right.
Which is not something that normally I can say, but it applies to me at least. I imagine it applies to other people too.
Sure. I wonder. I've often thought about this, like how to fix Yu-Gi-Oh's current issues with its meta. I think that I have like, and again, I'm not, I don't play Yu-Gi-Oh, so I don't have any beef with it as a game,
Mhm.
and also like, as a game company owner, I'm not really going to go out of my way and be like, I think this game sucks and you should play Fables. And like,
Legally,
yeah,
I cannot say
right,
that.
and that's not what, that's not the intention of this conversation. The intention is to just, discuss the greater concept of TCG theory.
Yeah.
But I think that like Yu-Gi-Oh is a really interesting example because it is one of the big three, and it does have its own unique path that it's taken from evolution, um, and where it's just really interesting to me how Fables End and Yu-Gi-Oh, there seems to be some crossover between those players, and we have quite a number of like former Yu-Gi-Oh players who come to us, or come to us. I say that kind of like, with a little bit of an exaggeration. It's not like they're like, I'm quitting Yu-Gi-Oh and I'm gonna play Fables End full time. It's not like how it works. But in that conversation, I always think like, oh, what is it that it would solve Yu-Gi-Oh's like meta problems? And my solution would be putting a cap on special summons. I think that would be the thing that would keep players from getting into that. But I mean, I don't know because I'm not a
Theoretically, yes. Uh, the problem with that, and again, this goes back to sort of older school Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot of like the main deck monsters, just in general, could like they didn't have ways of special summoning them. Just in general,
right,
they were the ones that had to be like normal summoned, so on and so forth. Special summoning used to be a special occasion. It ignored the restrictions of normal summoning, setting monster or tribute summoning something. It was a big event, for lack of a better term. It was not to be seen as something that happened, every single turn.
I think that
And unfortunately, that's what it is now.
yeah, for sure. And I think that that's just to like, tie this back to the larger conversation about TCGs. That seems to be sort of the evolution of a lot of TCGs where you have like this special thing that you can do, and then over time that special thing becomes the norm. And I'm wondering
Yes.
if that evolution is just inevitable, or if it's if you can design a game with the intention that we will keep the special things special and we will try to reserve them as much as possible. Or do you think it's just like it's the nature of the model that you give the players what excites them, right? Like hey, the players really want this, let's give them more, and then you give them more, and then all of a sudden like special summoning is the only thing that you do in the game that has any impact. Like normal summoning just doesn't even matter anymore. Or you normal summon so that you can get the special summons off, right? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I I think it's a little bit on the game developers to self-control a little bit, to be honest. Um, the first thought that comes to mind, like again, using Yu-Gi-Oh as an example, I am beating a dead horse. I do apologize. Uh, they just didn't have to like give effects that triggered on special summoning for a lot of like the main deck monsters. If that happens, then all of a sudden all of these like errant combos sort of just fizzle out, and you have to slow the game down considerably to get your value engines up.
Right.
Like if you do that, then considerably easier. It's not always going to happen, obviously, uh, but yeah, there's like Magic as well, because that's another one of like the big three. It's a little bit better because it is. I feel like the resource management that comes with Magic is like considerably better than Yu-Gi-Oh's, just because Yu-Gi-Oh is more of like a free form uh game, I guess is the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, the resource system in Yu-Gi-Oh is basically just like if it's not a once per turn limit or it doesn't say on the card that you can't do it, then you can just basically
Yeah.
do it ad infinitum, and it's um that's problematic for card games. Like you need
Yes,
restrictions on card
absolutely.
games. And even I think even in Fable's End and designing Fable's End, like I think the idea was to create a game where you could do a lot on your turn. And if you were creative enough, you could make a lot of things work. But like we don't have a resource system that where you're spending down on resources to pay for costs. We have like a kind of a space system where as long as that space exists, you can continuously do things, and as long as you have cards in hand. And the way that
Yeah.
the sort of resources work in Fable's End don't map cleanly onto games like Yu-Gi-Oh or Magic. And that's neither good nor bad. It's not like a it's not a
I
critique on
like it.
anything. It's just a like
Yeah.
this is how this system works versus other systems. And Yu-Gi-Oh definitely has Magic has a more nuanced cost system where every card has a mana cost, and in order to play that card, you have to spend that amount of mana, and you have to have that mana in play in order to do it, or you have to have it originate from some other source. So like, it's very dependent upon like setting up a resource system for yourself, and then using that
Uh-huh.
system to like, uh, how do I put it? To spend wisely. Like you have to you have to run the math in your head with your hand to say like, okay, do I spend 5 mana on this to bring this dude out, or do I spend 3 mana on this card to stop my opponent from doing this? And like Magic, I don't think it's as I don't think it's so detailed that you have to, that every turn is like you're writing down things on a sheet of paper trying to figure out the math for it. Um, I think some games can be like that, but generally speaking, it's like
Yeah.
do I have enough to make the thing that I want to make? Okay, I'm going to do that because like deck building focuses how you spend your resources. But Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic are really interesting comparisons because Yu-Gi-Oh is just isn't like that at all. It's not like, oh, this is a level 10 monster or whatever, like you have to spend 10 mana. It's just like, well, there's like ways around everything. You can cheat everything into play. Um,
Mhm. I mean, there used to be like monsters that were 10 stars and you had to, remove 3 of your own creatures on your own board. That was their cost.
right. Yeah, you just
Back in my day.
back in my day, we
Yeah,
tributed things to get them in play, and now it's just
yeah, exactly.
now it's you just play that one monster that goes and grabs the thing from your extra deck, and then you put that in play, and then that go grab something else, and then you put that in play, and then you like discard this card from your hand. It's like, and I don't even
Yeah.
know if that's bad necessarily, because in the grand scheme of like how a TCG works and what people are looking for in that experience. I don't, it's hard for me to say like I know because I don't think anyone truly knows as this whole system, all these systems are constantly evolving. But it seems like there is a break point for all of this, where there is a special thing that you can do in card games that feels really fun and really amazing when you do it. And if that special thing becomes normal, over time, players will either become tired of it or they will complain that it doesn't feel special anymore. And so I'm wondering like where that in the evolution of card games as they evolve, like as you year 10 of any given card game, like how do you balance player boredom with player excitement with player with balance? And I think that's a really tricky equation. I don't know if anyone's like fully solved that as a company.
I don't think so. That's just sort of a question on, oh, can you make a really good game that stands the test of time? And for the most part, no. But I think that's just with how like consumers will sometimes they'll move on from games, like how I've moved on from Yu-Gi-Oh!
Mhm.
And I found something else, in this case, Fable's End. Uh, but yeah, I think that no one has really solved that equation yet. It's just impossible to do with how the markets will constantly be changing. People will constantly need new products. The actual balance of your game, which is a completely different story from just needing new content,
Mhm.
so on and so forth.
I feel like the novelty of it is a really big player in that whole conversation too, right? Like players, it's so tricky because I think that trading card game, and I feel this way too. I am susceptible to this. I've been following Magic for 20 years, and I don't really play Magic that often, but like as a sort of bellwether to like where the industry is moving, Magic is a good place to pay attention to because they're constantly innovating what they're doing and to varying degrees of success, but generally speaking, like they are a growing product and they're always managing to pull in new people, and they are the biggest card game, if not, they're in the top three. They're the big three, and you
Yes.
could argue for different reasons that those big threes are one of those is bigger than the other. Magic seems to have found the right balance between both casual and competitive play and novelty, and that seems to be driving them forward. Although you could argue that it's going to drive them off a cliff, but I don't see that happening because I just think that the game is too cemented in gaming culture. It's just too ever present. Um, but I could be wrong about that. But ultimately, like if um, a game like Magic is constantly like pushing that, moving that needle forward, and like introducing a new thing, so like a novel thing where every expansion has a new mechanic, and then over 20 years of mechanics, they have like 5,000 keywords or whatever.
Yeah, they do have a lot.
Yeah, and then
They
that
have an inordinate amount.
and it feels sort of like how sustainable is that model in the long term? And I guess the answer is it is because Magic is 30 years old, but um, it's an interesting conundrum because you need novelty in your game to keep players who are legacy players engaged, but at the same time you can't innovate too much because um, then it's hard for newer players to get into the game because they're like, what is all this? This is so complex, and everyone else is like, what?
What
This is
on
great.
God's earth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so it's an interesting problem. And I'm just curious if like do games, do TCGs as they evolve, are they are they getting better at handling that long-term problem? Or are they just following the trend because a TCG Magic is just an exception, right? And that most TCGs will fail, and it's just like they just reach their logical endpoint, and that's it.
I feel like eventually they will reach a logical endpoint. Eventually, with enough time. It is dependent on like what game it is and how much content you can make out of it, but it will probably eventually get to the point of where it's like a lot of the stuff that they're currently making is like retrains of stuff that they created previously. Maybe it was like a dozen years ago, maybe it was only like 3 months ago. If you're doing the 3 months ago, that's a problem. Um, it's true. Uh, but it eventually gets to the point of where like all of the relative niches have been filled within the game in some way, and you have to either start creating new niches to fill, which is where they come in with all the new keywords in Magic for immediate example, or you just start redoing old stuff, which debatable on if that is a good thing or not.
Yeah, I've often wonder, and this to Yu-Gi-Oh. I often think about like if Yu-Gi-Oh did a soft or a hard relaunch of the game, um, to try to get it back to its kind of its source material, but also like incorporating all the new ideas because they've learned a lot, and there are a lot of ideas in modern Yu-Gi-Oh that are really really fun and they're really really cool. Um, even if they don't play in the way that players feel are the most fair, there are interesting ideas like
Yes.
is it I think it's Xyz monsters where you can the
Yeah, where you can overlay two of them.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that's pretty fun. That's a really fun idea to like have monster. You get like two monsters, put them under your monster, and then you can spend the monsters underneath that for effects. I think that's like a really fun idea. Um, how how it's executed in current Yu-Gi-Oh, I don't know if that's what players actually really want or they really feel is good, but um, it seems like I'd just be curious to know if like TCGs, if you could soft relaunch or hard relaunch a TCG, and it was one of the main three, how successful that would be. And I really do not know the answer.
I feel like it would be pretty successful. It's weird to say this. I think Magic would probably be the least successful one out of the three
Really?
if it was currently relaunched. Yeah. It's because people are mostly fine with how Magic is right now, right?
Yeah, that's true.
This is a very blanket statement. I do not speak for all of the different formats, admittedly. But for the most part, I feel like people are pretty okay with how Magic is. Even like if you're a player, if you're a collector, you don't care nearly as much.
Right.
Um, Pokemon, I don't actually have pretty much any experience in. So I can't fully speak to how that's currently going in terms of like metagame.
I don't know anything about Yu-Gi-Oh's competitive scene aside from the fact that Kwame follows it a little bit, and he's told me he's like the competitive scene is very very high level. Like the competitive
Yes,
Pokemon players are like
there's
really really they're very good thinkers. They can like transfer over to other card games and understand how to play them really really well, which is interesting to me because Pokemon is like definitely the game that's geared towards the youngest audience. And if it's true that the competitive scene in Pokemon is like producing the most consistently high level play of the trading card games, that's a like funny um that's a funny comparison. Just like curious how that all shakes out in the end. But yeah.
mm, let's see where actually I don't I know that you asked me this, but I guess I can ask you this this time. What's your end goal with Fable's End, just in general? Like what do you want it to eventually become?
I want it to reach its full potential. That's like the thing that I keep pushing forward with is I'm like I know that there's just more potential in the game than what has been presented so far. And our expansions and exploration has really proven that. I don't know where that potential ends. I have no idea like where we run, where is the point where we run out of ideas, where it's just we're rehashing the same cards. It's just like cosplaying a different time period, but it's really just the same game. Um, I just feel like the game has more to offer than what we've reached so far. Even with today, you and I tested something that's not even I don't even know when that will come out. Probably next year, maybe if we like are able to get it going, like maybe Q3 of 2026. Um,
Hmm.
and even then, it was like this is totally undiscovered territory. Like all of what we're doing is just completely this kind of trigger, this kind of counter, this kind of effect. Like we haven't even explored these at all in the game. And it just leads me to believe that there's so much more to this game than what I even originally thought. And I think that because of what it can do, but also because of the framework of the narratives that it can tell, it feels like a game that just deserves to have as much as many expansions as possible because there's just an endless sea of ideas and I want it to see I want it to get to that point where it's really hitting on all cylinders and it's really doing a bunch of stuff and all that stuff is really fun. I don't know how long that is. I mean, that could be 10 years from now. It could be 3 years from now. I have no idea. I don't know. But reaching its full potential is the end goal.
All right, that sounds good.
Well, I mean, I hope
I
that
don't know how.
from you being one of the playtesters and kind of seeing a lot of the
Mhm.
stuff like behind the scenes, I think you've probably seen more than anyone else at this point because
I have seen a copious amount.
yeah, I think you've actually seen more than Kwame has, which is kind of crazy because he and I have been kind of like missing each other a lot. Um,
Mhm. Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like that's a little fair.
right, right. And just that, we don't live in the same neighborhood, so it's harder for us to get together.
Yeah,
And our like work schedules don't always align. But
yeah.
the just from you having seen as much as you've seen, it feels like as we're exploring this stuff, there's just more and more and more with every discovery.
There's so much that you can actively do with this. Even if you don't add any new like zones to this game, thank God, please do not add in an extra deck to this game.
We're gonna do
You can't
special
see it, but
something. It's
I'm
gonna be
praying.
yeah.
You can't see it, but I'm praying. But even if you don't add like any immediate zones, there's so much more that you can do just like with what we all have. It's great.
And that to me, it's kind of surprising actually. Like, and I'm not saying this as a I'm not trying to pat myself in the back here in any way, shape, or form. It's just that it's a matter of like this game just does more than I thought it would ever do. In terms of the first round of designs that I came up with were like, hey, let's do this, fairy tale kingdoms, and this will be really fun. And then it became, hey, let's explore this other like subject matter that I've not touched on. And then that became, oh, now we have a plan for like 25 expansions. And
Oh, we have a problem. There's a lot of stuff I need to do and not enough time.
yeah, basically. And it's like for anyone that is listening that doesn't know, we have our expansions broken down into 3 phases at the moment. There are more phases after that, but we've just gotten to phase 3 in terms of like planning. Then we'll go to 4 and 5 and 6 after this, but it's phase 1, which is the first 4 expansions, which are by and large like I would say the first 3 are like pretty done mechanically. There's a little bit of like balance here and there, but generally speaking, everything's like pretty good. And then
Everything looks good.
everything looks good, yeah. And there might be like one or two little, oh, oops, we didn't see this. And we just we've been playtesting them for months, so it's not a matter of like we just threw these together. It's like we put them through the ringer, and we've had them playtest and with tons of new cards that we haven't even found a home for. So but basically phase 1 is our first 4 expansions. Phase 2 is six expansions, and I think it's actually going to grow to 8 expansions, because we realized that there's a lot of like leftover stuff that was really really fun but didn't quite fit. So we're gonna like throw that in at the end, and that should tie everything together nicely.
Yeah, fresh battle packs.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
yeah. I think it's going to be 2 battle packs that will tie everything together. But even as and phase 3 is going to be something. It will be similar. It's kind of like pulling all the lessons learned from phase 1 and 2, and phase 3 is where we're really going to start hitting some of the big ideas for Fable's End. And phase 1 and 2. Phase 1 is like extending the core set, kind of exploring that game space. Phase 2 is like a big concept that's tied together through multiple threads. And then phase 3 is like large scale storytelling ideas and presented in a way that's going to be kind of the middle ground between top down and bottom up design. But for phase 1, we're like dealing with stuff in phase 2, and we're pretty like I'd say we're like halfway through kind of exploration of phase 2 and like where we want this to land. And Tylen and I today we're doing some phase 2 stuff.
Yep.
But like we're just not even close to being anywhere where the game is even going to go, and we're still like finding hundreds of different ways to do things, and different mechanics and different triggers and like different ways to represent things, and like there's just so much there, and it's kind of astounding. To my eye, I was not expecting that to be the case. So,
Excuse me. But yeah, before we head out, did you want to give any of our listeners a little sneak peek, a spoiler at something? Do you want to just tell them about anything immediately
um,
before we head out?
at the moment, let me try to think about like what I could spoil. Um,
Do you want to give them a hint from something that's in phase 1 then?
yeah, I think so. I think there's a mechanic in phase 1 that is popping up all over the place in Fable's End that I think actually will completely change the way the game is played. For us, it's so normal that we don't even think about it. But it is imagine I will give you a little bit of a taste of what it is. Imagine that you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh, and rather than having to have a specific trap card in order to stop a specific interaction, you would have something in your deck that everybody would have that would be able to stop that. You'd have like a built-in negate, so to speak. That's something that I'll just leave it there. I won't explain what that means or how that works or how it functions. It's not going to be like a, even by saying this, I'm not like giving away the overall plan of Fable's End, because it will be so normal come expansion 3 or 4. But I do think it's really, really exciting for what Fable's End can do as a system. And I think it's really something that only Fable's End can do. Unless Tylen, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, I know absolutely what
Okay,
you're talking
okay.
about.
Would you agree with that, or am I off base saying that?
No, I think you're correct. I think it's your description of it is fair.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I don't
we will
want.
start doing
Yeah,
previews in the next, I would say in the next month or so. We'll probably start jumping into some of the previews for our first expansion,
yeah.
just to kind of like get you
People can
involved.
see. Woo.
Yeah, which will be hilarious because we've been working on it for so long. It's like, oh wow,
Yeah.
people can actually see it, and I think that's like a whole other podcast altogether. But
Yep.
yeah, but we should wrap up because we're already past our 30-minute mark.
Yeah.
But Tylen, again, thank you for being on the cast again. I'm sure you will return. We can continue our conversation about any other card game or games in general.
Will do. Thank you for having me, Stephen. I know that it's just something we're trying to do more of, and it's good to talk to you about this. It's fun to hear your thought process. That I like listening to other people, like how they think about stuff like this.
I feel the same way, Tylen. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast because I agree. It's really nice to have someone who has a different background than me, who thinks about things differently, and especially get your feedback on Fable's End and like where you feel the game is strong or where you feel like it needs work or whatever. I always really appreciate that. So
Yeah. Until next time, then.
until next time, yeah. Thank you everyone for listening, and we will see you in a week. Bye.
Take care.